Hello again. I am Marlene Timberlake Diadamo, and welcome to this next session titled Insights from NASDAQ. Here with me is Lauren Dillard, Executive Vice President of Investment Intelligence for NASDAQ. She leads the strategic direction of the division, has full P&L responsibility, and is accountable for fostering growth across NASDAQ's index, data, and analytics business. Welcome, Lauren, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to get right into it. I am very excited to have this conversation with you, given where you sit within the NASDAQ organization. Today, we're going to talk about the work that is being done by the NASDAQ at the intersection of DE and I. To get started, and as mentioned by almost every panel so far, the past 12 to 18 months have been very volatile, including being gripped by a health pandemic and a racial reckoning, the likes of which we've not seen before. Can you tell us about NASDAQ's role at the intersection of DEI and how you and your organization has adjusted to address these two major scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me. This is a terrific day. It's been really insightful conversations leading up to this point, so I'm happy to continue this discussion. You are right. We do believe at NASDAQ we sit at a really unique place in the ecosystem where we're not just a listings venue for 3,000 companies that we support as they access capital, but we're also a technology and data provider to asset managers, to asset owners, to other exchanges around the world. And it puts us in a really unique place to understand challenges, to need to be responsive to our clients and our communities and our employees. And I would say in the last 12 and 18 months, as everyone has spoken about, I think we believe many of the trends and the concerns obviously were there. They just became highlighted. And I think about what we've done at NASDAQ to engage again with our communities, with our clients, with our employees. And it all goes back to our purpose. And our purpose is to drive inclusive growth and prosperity. And we've always had a vision reimagining markets. We've always had employee resource groups. We've always actually had a foundation and entrepreneurial center since 2014. But the last 18 months really allowed us to hang all of those together and make sure that we all were integrating this purpose into our day-to-day existence. And I would say if you use integration, because I know that's a word that a lot of people like to use, I would start there. You know, within investment intelligence, we really serve asset managers, asset owners with data, transparency, with indices to drive investment decisions. We're not an asset manager, we're not an allocator, as you are an investor. But our job is to make sure that we take the data and we normalize it and we remove friction from the system. And much in the same way that we've done that off of our eVestment platform for 2 decades, it has 23,000 strategies in it and close to 3,000 asset owners and allocators and asset managers that use it. We have integrated ESG now and D&I data in the same way that it used to just be investment metrics. And we've worked in a community, in a partnership way, partnering with ILPA and the FCLT and other asset managers and asset owners and consultants within the community to make sure that we normalize that data and that we remove friction. I mean, I think you've heard it from a lot of the panel today. Decision-making can be incorporated and integrated in many different ways, but providing the data in a standard form should not be where people are tripping. And we fundamentally believe that is a place that we sit. And if we can remove the friction, it will frankly drive better investment decisions around the entire ecosystem.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit now that we've covered the integration, can you talk a little bit about the partnerships that you have as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, depending on where you see our clients, and again, we have corporate issuer clients, we have asset manager clients, we have asset owner clients, we like to partner across the community. So whether that's the Chamber of Commerce, whether that's the Business Roundtable, whether that's bio, we engage across the community as we make our decisions, as we provide better products, better data, better technology to our clients and our customers. We do the same thing on investment intelligence with the IIDC, with FCLT, with ILPA. I mention those because those are all important industry partners in an effort, again, so that we don't have multiple people creating sort of different rails that are slightly similar but look different as far as data collection. Again, we're a technology and data provider, so we just want to make sure that whatever the templates are that everyone is looking for or seeking data, that we can actually standardize that and normalize it. So partnering across the community is really important to us. We do that also, of course, at our entrepreneurial center. We partner with all sorts of associations and different community industry associations. And there, again, if we're driving inclusive capital, creating training and a place for entrepreneurs to go before they create their private company, before they list on one of the listing venues, fundamentally can be sort of the starting point for those entrepreneurs. And it's really interesting, if you look back through to 2014, close to 65% of the entrepreneurs that have gone through there are either women or from underrepresented minority groups. So it shows the power of that starting point for entrepreneurs. So we do a lot of partnering. That's really important to us, where we sit in the ecosystem.
Great, thanks. And prior to us getting on this conversation, you and I were talking a little bit in the background, and we were really talking about data. And one of the reasons that I'm really excited to have this conversation with you is because, as others have talked about, data is really important. And there is this struggle to you talk about sort of normalizing, but there's a struggle to sort of understand and use and make it so that it goes the farthest. We can stretch it the farthest. So can you talk a little bit about how important that is to your role, particularly in what you do at the NASDAQ?
Yeah, well, I run the data business, so it is very, very important to my role. I would start with that by saying that. I mean, I think what we find is, there's kind of fundamental data right now that people are looking to, that I would call it quantitative. So number of portfolio managers that are investing. If you look at board diversity, if you look at, but if you move down to private companies, you have the same data needs there. You look at, again, who's on the management team, who's on the board. And so those I would call quantitative data metrics. Then there's qualitative data metrics, which we found in working with our partners in the consulting community and the asset owner and the asset manager allocator community. Qualitative matters. So, do you have certain policies? Do you have hiring practices? Are you measuring your internal employees? Like, what are your actual policies? And those are important because they are qualitative metrics that at the end of the day will make an impact to those quantitative numbers. And I think that is an evolution in the data that we've collected. We had actually collected ESG data, and we really expanded the D&I questionnaire to try to adjust, not just for those quantitative metrics, because everyone does want to understand, in the spirit of diverse teams make better decisions. And there's lots of studies, we don't need to get into that. I think it's been covered this morning as well, that show that. But how do you actually get to those qualitative practices that firms and companies have in place to help drive those quantitative metrics? So in the questionnaire that we rolled out, we actually have those qualitative metrics for the first time.
Great. And then moving from data to another pillar, because we've spoken before in terms of our pillars, in terms of engagement, how are you engaging as an organization with your clients, your stakeholders, your community, your employees?
Yeah. Well, let's start with employees, because at the end of the day, those are our most valuable assets at all of the firms where we work. I think number one, purpose matters. We've seen that. We've incorporated that in our day-to-day. Second, I think over the last 12 months, and you referenced this, making sure that we were really organized and very clearly communicative of our support, of our employee resource groups, of making sure they were elevated, of really organizing and measuring impact. I think there's always been a focus around recruitment, retention, but also community engagement. Another pillar is vendors. How are we looking at our vendor? What's the makeup of the vendor from a gender, from Black, Brown executives that are on our engagement teams, and our vendors? And we stretch that all the way to our venture arm and making sure that we are bringing capital from those groups to the table. So, I mean, really and truly, our employee engagement over the last 12 months, I would say it's those programs were always there, but it's how are they elevated? How are they making an impact? What new programs do we roll out, and how do we make sure that we're frankly being responsive as leadership teams to our employees? And so that we've done that, I would say, from an employee perspective, as have most organizations. And what I think is terrific about all of this is absolutely something where best practices are shared, and all boats rise. And I think the number of other companies, whether they're our listed companies or whether they're our clients, who are saying and asking us, what's working, what's not working. And it's really incredible. We ran an Our Talk series where we had our Black executives interview various authors, investors, and made that available every month following last year. And that resonated with our entire employee population, how to be an ally. And we shared that with other companies and they implemented it. And, I think I really like to see that around employee engagement, this is one of those things that we can all listen and learn and apply best practices to, and then measure the output. And clearly retention and recruitment is something that we're obviously all focused on, and we should be focused on. And I think a lot of the practices you see, we engage with as well. Unconscious bias training, making sure we have a diverse slate interviewing, making sure we have a diverse slate of interviewees. So, many of those best practices, I think it's terrific to see other companies implementing, because again, we can all listen and learn. So that's how we've engaged with our employees. Around community, I would say a lot of the same thing. We've engaged with community. We've targeted and focused on certain elevation, whether that's, right now we have a really big LGBTQ event tomorrow hosted by our open employee resource group. We engage with various other community, associations, depending on what the employee resources group want to focus on. And that's where it's really important, because it gives the power back to the employees to really where they want to make a difference. And then there's been matching programs and all of those. So we've done a lot of things over the last 12 months, all really trying to tie to our employees, to our purpose.
Great. One of the things that has been mentioned a couple of times in this forum is the fact that organizations have been doing this work for a long time, and a lot of organizations have said, but we just haven't seen enough. We haven't seen enough effort. We haven't seen enough of the outcomes. Sort of a two-part question in terms of, we've talked about the things that you guys were doing before the events of the last 18 months. And I'm curious to see how you've used the data and the research to maybe switch, are there lessons that you've learned and ways that you have determined that you can improve what you're doing to see those better outcomes now that we've had the events, that we've had over the last year and a half?
Yeah, well, you measure what matters, and what matters gets measured, right? I mean, I think, running the data business, that is what we do. And I think we were doing that, in all honesty, but I think it's with a more emphatic force around the metrics, around the numbers. We, as did many companies, published our employee data for the first time. We've always had our sustainability report, but all of a sudden different metrics get measured. So I think, and like everyone else, and we are a technology company, we're always investing in technology. So, better ways to track candidates, better ways to make sure that other people know about job opportunities so that we can sponsor and move our candidates around in a really intentional way. I think it's all about using the data to drive intention. And we have invested in technology so that we can do that, as well as, again, making our metrics published. And, we all have work to do. We absolutely all have work to do. But there's definitely a flywheel effect when it's elevated. And of course, we listen to our employees. We do a lot of employee surveys on the topic, and DE&I is a big topic from a lot of our employees. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. What are you seeing? I'm just so excited to jump in. What are you seeing in terms of your clients? Because again, what we talked about is you sit at a very different point from a lot of our panelists. And I wanted to make sure that we got a chance to highlight that and for you to really talk about the perspectives that you're seeing from the vantage point from where you sit.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you go back to our asset manager and asset owner clients, who many of are on this call, I think what we heard the most over the last 12 months is, we know this matters. We're integrating it into our investment decision, or we, asset manager, are being asked all of this data. And again, how do we make it easier? How do we make it more standard? How do we streamline it? How do we work as a coalition and a partnership, again, under the spirit that this data needs to be out there in a standard form? And that's what we really did when we launched the DE&I questionnaire. And by the way, we launched it in January with the help of a whole community of partners, to make sure that it was inclusive in the questions, to make sure that it was getting to the actual information that companies were looking for, that the consultants and allocators were looking for, so that the asset managers could answer at once, and it be standard. And already we have 20% of our participants answering some sort of question or saying they can provide the answer. Yes, there will always be some of the privacy issues that we have in various locations, but 20% in such a short time, we view as strong indication that if this worked right, the flywheel will work. And again, you can incorporate that as CalPERS into an investment process in the way that works with your policy for your beneficiaries. But you shouldn't, from our view, we shouldn't be having different ways to collect that data. It all should be standard. Again, it goes back to the normalization and the friction. So we really listened to clients as we evaluated that, because we don't want to just be, another data template that maybe somebody uses, but it doesn't really answer what you're looking for as you integrate it into your investment decision making. And frankly, we do that on the public side as well as the private investing. So managers of investing private capital. And I think that's really important, because we, within eVestment, because we have so many asset managers and asset owners, it's an important part of the portfolio.
And that's why we sort of keep going back to the vantage point from where you sit in terms of the data. And, just a question about, again, the events of the last, year and a half, and how receptive individuals, firms have been to innovation and new ways of looking at data. And quite frankly, understanding that, the old ways sort of, weren't getting us where we needed to go. And so, we need to roll out some things that are going to be a little bit more quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, show not just quantitative, but qualitative. I think that's the other bit to it that matters. Policies matter, programs matter that asset managers have. Numbers unfortunately take time to move. And I think we've seen that. We've seen that with board diversity numbers. And we're going to see that with investor quantitative numbers. The numbers that we have from the 20%, which we published, they're not great. Less than 10% of money is being run by women. Like that's not a great number, but at least it's out there. And at least then you can also look at the policies that are in place and the programs that are in place, so that you can see whether that there's a path to move those numbers. To me, that's what is really important about the data. if we just keep measuring sort of numbers that aren't moving, we're going to be at this glacial pace that we've been at. But clearly within the last 12 months, and you can see it from even the new board of director numbers over the last 12 months, you are seeing meaningful change. But it has been a long time to get here, of course.
I was going to say, I think we're all a bit impatient, and so even though we've seen more change than what we've seen in the past, by context, it's not enough.
I know.
It's not quick enough. It's not fast enough. It's not enough. And so,
Yeah.
we really have to find ways to get to where we need to go and to bring everybody along. And I know we keep sort of going back to the data, and I really love your reference about sort of the glacial pace, because data is great. But I like the fact that you've also brought in, and as has been discussed in previous panels, about policies and
Yes.
procedures. And, the recognition is that it's not really just about throwing up a bunch of numbers and then saying to an organization, well, what are you going to do about it? It's about a process that incorporates a lot of activities and a lot of, really meaningful and thoughtful, decisioning in
Yeah.
order, for each organization to understand sort of what they need to do in order to make change and in their organization. And
That's right.
the path is not going to be the same. The data is not necessarily going to be the same.
That's right.
Everyone needs to recognize what is specific for them and how they're going to get their organization there.
Yeah.
No,
And that's exactly right. And like, that's why a question like, do you have a mentor program matters? Because if you actually look at the numbers, and someone on an earlier panel referenced that Women in the Workplace McKinsey report, there's a flywheel to, if you have a mentor program and then you end up mentoring, then you have a number that mentors senior women or that mentors, Black executives. And then you look at the number as you get, for instance, in that McKinsey report, and it was women in the workforce, so it had that lens, but it actually showed that senior women actually sponsor Black women more frequently. So that's an important fact. And again, it goes back to the program. It's not actually all the way to the numbers, because the numbers aren't good, but it goes back to the fundamental of the program. So not everyone is going to get there the same way. It's a really important stat I like to use because I sponsor our Globe ERG, which is our Black employees. And I use it a lot because we have to sponsor and mentor the executives as they're coming through the ranks. It's an important program, but it's qualitative, not necessarily quantitative.
A question that I wanted to ask you, and one that was actually posed earlier, which I thought was really good, is, what is it that you've talked a lot about what your organization is doing and the different things that you've done over the last couple of years, including most recently. But is there something that you really would want us to know about what you're doing, something that didn't come up, or something that you've sort of learned in the most recent experience that you really wanted to share with this group?
Yeah, I mean, I would say two things, and I've said them both, but might as well say the two things that matter. First of all, purpose matters, and that driving inclusive growth for us ties everybody together. And the second thing that I think really matters, and again, I'm saying this, definitely saying this from a data lens, but having a single source of data, normalizing it, removing the friction, working as an ecosystem so that we can do that part, so that then the hard part, which is where are you going to invest your dollars and how are you going to drive returns for your beneficiaries, you can spend time evaluating it and not actually worrying about, are the numbers aligned and are you using the right criteria, and from an asset manager perspective, have I filled out all of these 10 templates? So I go back to that sort of, how do we remove the friction? And if we can remove the friction, then I think, again, the flywheel can move faster. So when I think about driving inclusive capital, and I think about our purpose and our role in that as a technology, and for me as a data, running the data business, that is the purpose there. It's to remove that friction and make that flywheel work faster. And I think we all benefit from it. Those would be my two takeaways.
Great, thanks. So you've mentioned removing the friction quite a bit. So I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't sort of say, what is your, for folks that are sitting out here, and we have, hundreds of folks that are listening in to this conversation, what would be the thing that you would say to them in terms of how to start doing that, how to figure out where there's friction in the data that they use, how to normalize the data, and how to start using that towards purposeful change and purposeful, direction in terms of this DEI strategy?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, if you want our data, you can use it. And second of all, if you don't think it's capturing something that we've worked with the industry partners to capture, we need to know, because otherwise we end up with yet another different, collection mechanism for that data. And then I would say, use it. And then if you don't have the policies that are in place that are clearly being asked, I mentioned mentor, but there's other quantitative policies, that needs to get elevated within the organizations, because there's a reason that those questions are asked. They're driving inclusive growth. They drive diversity within organizations. So I would say, take a look at the questionnaire, start with that questionnaire, and make sure that it's what your organization is using. And then there's always going to be iterations. This whole process has to be iterative. I think we heard that earlier, and we obviously believe that, and we've iterated a lot. But I think that's the way to start. It's got to be policy driven, and it's got to be, you've got to measure what matters. So I think that's where I would start from a data perspective.
Okay, so now that we've spoken about the past, I'm going to ask you to put your futurist hat on and talk a little bit about maybe some of the trends that you're seeing in the data, and that those trends that you think might influence sort of what we see in the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we all have to believe that those numbers better reflect society, better reflect the beneficiaries that people are investing on behalf of. The only way to do that is to measure numbers and, then make some ultimately difficult decisions around it. But transparency is the first place to start, and then discussions. And you had some of these decisions from investors before. I sit from a seat of a data and technology provider and not from an investor. But so many of the things you heard before, investors are asking for the information. So there needs to be a standard place to get it. Investors are going to start making, whether it's voting decisions or investment decisions, on using that information. So there's both sides of that equation. We thankfully sit in the middle, and we can provide that information to others to make the decisions for. But I think that's what we all have to hope. We all have to hope those numbers don't look like 10% for women, and even worse for Black and Brown. And they look more like the people we invest on behalf of and are in our society and our employee base.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you for a great discussion. I want to thank you all for joining us for the first half of the day for the 2021 Diversity Forum. We're now going to take a break for lunch until 1:15 Pacific, and please tune back in then, because we have many more great speakers and sessions still to come. Thank you all. Thank you, Lauren. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yes, it was fun.